Thank you. We've got Tim Jackson, you can see on with us from the UK. I'll introduce him, and then he will hopefully give us some thoughts on the document we sent him on the education for the Ecozoic project, which we hope will be forthcoming in the next year or so. So Tim is he's sort of a force of nature in a way, right? He gets stuff done, right? And he's a very, very active and admirable person. He's the author of Prosperity Without Growth, a very impactful book globally on the need for a different economic agenda. He's the director of the Center for Understanding Sustainable Prosperity, and he was an economics commissioner in the UK from the years 2004 to 11, which I think inspired his thoughts about CUSP and what was needed in new directions in the economy. And he's also an accomplished playwright. Welcome to Tim. Thanks for joining us. I know it's evening time, and we're taking that into account.
Great to be here. I feel as though I should perform or something now, but I'm not quite sure what to do.
You can go. Go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, no. So Peter's asked me just really to talk a little bit about the education for the Ecozoic project, and I'm looking at a draft plan for this. I wasn't planning to do anything that was a formal presentation, so I thought I would just give you a few thoughts about where I think this agenda is and where this might sit, certainly with the work that we've been doing. And I suppose I could say, first of all, I think it would sit very well with that work. CUSP, which is the research centre that I direct, is it's called the Centre for the Understanding of Sustainable Prosperity. And as Peter suggests, it came, or a lot of it came from the work that I was doing when I was Economics Commissioner on the Sustainable Development Commission in the United Kingdom. And what came out of that work was certainly partly a critique of the existing conventional economics and the economic model, but was also a sort of the beginnings of a kind of a plan, if you like, for revisioning prosperity, for thinking differently about prosperity. And when we had the chance to put in a research application, a proposal to the Research Council here, the Economic and Social Research Council, what we pitched to them was essentially a 5-year project of research, of capacity building, including a PhD program that had various components to it. Philosophy, economics, of course, but also sociology and psychology, and a degree of political science. And what we've built in the first year or so of that program is a really fascinating cohort of younger researchers who is probably worth just saying a little bit about, because I think they are a part of the population that you would be trying to reach with this project and trying to support with this project. And to me, they're an absolutely fascinating cohort for all sorts of reasons. One is that they tend to run faster than I can keep up with, and that's probably true of others who are trying to lead these sorts of programs as well, which is of course a very good thing. It keeps me a little bit agile, but it's also quite a challenging thing, because in a sense we have to kind of see where these kids, not so much kids sometimes, but where these younger researchers, early career researchers, are going, anticipate their needs in a world that's changing quite fast around us. We've done that through building a doctoral program that now has around about 15 to 20 students in it, in all sorts of disciplines, and we've done it also with the eye to establishing from a very early stage a kind of interdisciplinary nature to their studentships. And that's been a great thing to do, but it also has some challenges. One of the challenges is that these students are looking to go out into the world with the appropriate qualifications for them to be seen within their peer group as appropriate students, appropriate scholars, or appropriate academics, or going out into a less academic environment, but with a very clear disciplinary skill. And sometimes that has stood a little bit in the way of us creating this interdisciplinary space. And it's probably worth just giving you a couple of anecdotes about economics in this regard. We have an economics department in the university where the center is based. And I have had multiple conversations with economists from that department. And I've had quite a lot of money coming in that I could have and would have been very happy to share with that economics department. And the weird twist is that I can't sell it to them, even for money, even for students, even for outputs, because two things really. One is that the economics departments in the UK, and I'm not sure to what extent that's true in North America, but it certainly is in some places, are very oriented towards various research assessment frameworks which dictate the kind of outputs that each department and each discipline can regard as being valuable. And for the economics departments in the UK, and I've had this conversation 3 or 4 times, as I said, with our own economics department, that's quite narrowly constrained. So that's been a problem for us. I mean, I've had extraordinary conversations in the sense that, you know, I would go and have a private conversation with someone saying, you know, would you co-supervise this student? Would you like to be involved in this program? We have the funding for it. All you have to do is come along and be a part of that. And they will call me in for a meeting and talk about all the reasons why they can't do it. So on another occasion, I wanted to badge one of our projects as being an economics project under a pot of funding that was both about economics and about environmental things. And I was told by the postdoctoral director in the economics department that I was not allowed to badge it as an economics project. And this was in spite of the fact that the individual himself had published a book, a well-regarded book in economics, and the project that he was doing was clearly economics, and yet the economics department didn't want to recognize his PhD as an economics PhD. And I said, why not? And the guy said, I'd rather not tell you by email. Perhaps we could meet and discuss it by coffee, over coffee sometime. And it was to me, we haven't actually ever had that conversation, although at some point I really do need to find out exactly what's going on there. But it's by way of illustration, I suppose, that what a program like Education for the Ecozoic might be trying to do, while it's absolutely necessary, and on the one hand, you have this cohort of younger researchers who are really rushing towards what we might want to provide through such a program, it is going to come up a little bit against these stumbling blocks of disciplinary bounds and the desires of those same researchers actually to have a career that's well-founded, well-regarded within their own discipline. So that is not at all, I would say, an argument for not doing this. And in fact, what Economics for the Anthropocene has already done is to kind of break that mold. And we've been very happy to be engaged in that so far in a quite light way. We had envisaged in our original collaboration agreement, we'd envisaged a number of exchanges between the two programs, and we would certainly be very keen to take that further. And we've had a couple of students come over so far to work with us in CUSP. We haven't as yet sent somebody in your direction, but I think that's probably about to change. We have some PhD students who are clearly working in areas which are very closely associated with what you're doing. And to my mind, the ability to keep on doing that, both in terms of having the Economics for the Anthropocene or a doctoral training program in this area continuing, and in terms of our collaboration in that, I would be very happy to see both of those things happening. So the question marks for me around this as a continuation were, and this is really open for discussion, I suppose, what do we bring to that development of leadership and that progress of a doctoral training program by shifting from the language of the Anthropocene to the Ecozoic? To me, there are, I would say, some advantages and some disadvantages to that. The disadvantages, just to get those out of the way, I think would be having established E4A and begun to get a reputation for it and a name for it, then E4A kind of exists out there. It's clearly a badge, a brand, and it clearly says something that speaks to the language that is very topical at the moment around the Anthropocene. So I think that's something that should be thought about carefully, because I don't think it should be entirely thrown away, the value of that as brand. The advantage of shifting to something like the Ecozoic, of course, is firstly that the Anthropocene itself has been to some extent captured, both by lots of other educational programs and lots of other publishing houses and lots of other views on what the Anthropocene consists in. And the idea of the Ecozoic is something is deeper. It appeals, I think, to a deeper ecological logic. It appeals to writers and thinkers who have a slightly more philosophical bent than the ones who formulated the language of the Anthropocene. And I would be very interested to know to what extent that has motivated this shift in language from one place to the other. And then a final thought, that I think ultimately the success of this and its attractiveness to scholars depends on having a little bit more insight into what the substance of the program would be. And there, I suppose I'm thinking, you know, along the lines of fleshing out the way, the disciplinary ground that it would cover, but also the way that it would approach each of those disciplinary areas, the way that it would attempt to develop skills and indeed knowledge bases within each of those areas. And I think it would be really useful to flesh that out a little bit more in a draft program, and indeed to relate that, if this is the decision to go in this direction towards a different name with a slightly deeper sort of ecological resonance, to relate that content more to the concept of the Ecozoic and its deeper meanings and articulations. So those are my initial thoughts. As I said right at the beginning, I'd be delighted for us to be part of this. Not quite sure in what capacity. This idea of exchanges that we developed with Economics for the Anthropocene, still very much a possibility. Perhaps something more than that, a bigger alliance of a program, doctoral programs in North America with doctoral programs in Europe, or at least in the UK. There are some difficulties associated with that because we don't structure our doctoral programs in quite the same way as you do there, but I think they would not be insurmountable, those difficulties. And I would be very keen to hear your thoughts on how you would intend to proceed with this and what kind of role we could play.
Thank you very much, Jim. If you have any questions or comments, we can direct it to him, bearing in mind that it's the evening over there, so we don't want to be late. Anybody want to pose a question or objection? Okay, Tim, thank you very much. Pleasure. It's the Ecozoic. Well, the Anthropocene was an unknown concept, or not very well-known concept when we started. And when you try to explain to somebody what you're doing and you use the word Anthropocene, you usually get this sort of blank look, like what in the hell is that? And that's gradually diminished over time. But
yeah.
We'll have to start over with the Ecozoic. I think it is a deeper term in a way, right? It's more, invites you into the notion of living on Earth with a lot of other plants and animals, right? And so that's a different feature of it. And it's, and we definitely have to think through the implications of the title for the curriculum, which is what I think you're mainly pointing to, and completely agree with that. But one of the things I like about the Ecozoic myself is that it's more hopeful. I think it's the Anthropocene is kind of a,
Yeah.
you know, sort of a, you know, it's a bad hangover, right? After a really long binge, right?
Right.
It's time to sober up and watch the sunlight. So, so it's attractive because it's a positive image, I think.
Yeah, no, I think I would absolutely agree with that, and I would say that I love the kinds of writings of that era and of that nature, which took a sort of deeper and more philosophical perspective, which drew more on indigenous models of the relationship between humanity and nature, and for that reason, you know, I'm kind of, I find it also very appealing. I think it is just that question of sort of articulating a little bit more, you know, what those resonances are and what the implications of that is for content.
Yeah, we expect to be working with some of Indigenous scholars and communities in Canada for precisely that reason. So, yeah. So thank you very much. Anybody else have a comment? Yes, Ellen.
Hi, Tim. I'm Ellie Perkins from York.
Hi there.
Hi. I just wanted, can you hear?
I can hear, but poorly. Yeah, the mic would help. Thanks.
Okay. I just wanted to ask you, from your experience with CUSP and everything else that you've done there, how important is it to have connections with community organizations, grassroots organizations, civil society organizations, and people outside academia to build the momentum for changing, breaking down those disciplinary boundaries and changing the way scholarly work works?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and my experience of that, which now spans 3 separate but related research groups, is a kind of Kevin Costner Field of Dreams experience. If you build it, they will come. As a kind of it was in both 2 major cases absolutely extraordinary that once we had set out our stall, so to speak, and put the idea of what we were trying to bring as a research community into the public, that our principal audience very, very quickly became a more civil society audience, I would say, than an academic audience. And to this day, when we organize events, and we have obviously put some thought into that, some that wasn't entirely without forethought, but the forethought was to communicate what we were doing, not specifically only in research and academic terms, but to formulate what we were doing in terms of vision and social progress that's accessible to a wider audience. And to the extent that we were successful in doing that, we drew in this set of people, this audience that you're talking about, almost too successfully. We actually found it quite difficult to manage the demand associated with the attractiveness of ourselves as a research institute in this field, where you had social entrepreneurs, where you had civil society organizations, where you had lay public organizations, all actually struggling to some extent with the same kinds of issues, but doing it very much more from a lay or civil society perspective. And actually one of the difficulties with, certainly with Resolve, which was a research group that I led back in the early 2000s, was we were just not prepared for that. We were not prepared for the extent to which we would have people coming, wanting to establish a relationship with us as an academic center for all sorts of reasons. Firstly, to endorse some of the work that they were doing. Secondly, to test some of the things that they were carrying out. Thirdly, to partner in fundraising initiatives and in events. And fourthly, I think just because what we provided in that academic context was a sort of validation, if you like, of the vision that some of these grassroots organizations and social enterprises were striving for. So that was a lesson that we took a little bit to heart in the setting up CUSP, and we established very specifically from the outset a network of what we call CUSP fellows, who could come from any walks of life, and most of the ones that we have now attracted come from, I would say, civil society broadly speaking, but we do also have some from policy and some from business. And what they've enabled us to do really is to ground, but partly to ground our work very much in the experience of these kinds of initiatives and social experiments, and second, to begin to create a sort of sense of critical mass, a momentum around the vision that we were talking about. So I think it's been a really important part of our relationships in the past, specifically those, what you might call, I think, legitimately sort of social experiments in social enterprise, in civil society, in various lay sectors, which are driven by this same idea of a vision of a different sense of prosperity.
Yes, Dan. You want to access the mic? Yeah. Dan O'Neill.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Dan. You're not in Leeds.
Not in Leeds. I'm in Canada.
Hey.
Surprise, surprise. I spent the first half of my sabbatical at the University of Victoria. And I was saying, so to talk about your remarks on attempting to deal with the economics department at your own university and other universities. And I guess maybe I felt like I've been in a little bit of a bubble at Leeds where we have quite a sympathetic economics department as heterodox economists. And so we've been working on building those connections. And then when I went to Victoria, I tried to do the same thing with the economics department there. It was really like running into a big brick wall. And there were some very nice people, and we had some nice discussions. And I sort of described the kind of work that we do, and they say, "Oh, that's really interesting." Well, in economics, what we do is, well, I mean, well, in neoclassical economics, what we do is blah blah blah. And it became quite clear that while they were kind of interested in some of this work, they really didn't see it as economics and the ecological economics work. And so, how important do you think it is for us to try to engage with the mainstream economic establishment? Is that a productive enterprise, or should we just be trying to go around that? Again, it's something that I've kind of struggled with. And also, we have this new center in the UK, that this new Network Plus on rebuilding macroeconomics. And again, I kind of wonder if that's going to be helpful or not.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think first of all, I would say it's changing. It isn't changing at the same pace everywhere, sadly, but it is changing. And you're right that there are economics departments that are much more forward-thinking, much more open. They're still in the UK bound by some quite rigid kind of performance indicator standards, which constrains what they can do. But actually, individuals within those departments are very, very open, at least in conversation about the constraints on them and where they have to act in order to satisfy these performance indicators. So my sense is that we should always be trying to work with economics departments, however hard it is, and working with those who will work with us. And that's kind of the approach that we've taken, not just with economics departments, but with economists generally, and chief economists in particular. There are some wonderful chief economists out there in some quite surprising places, like the one, for example, in the Department for International Development in Paris, in France, who is perhaps the most progressive chief economist that I've come across anywhere, totally gets this entire agenda and is busy using the resources of a department in a government to take forward research at a pace that's faster even than we can do it, because he's got more resources to do it with. And similarly, the kind of experience of conversations in the Bank of England and some of the individuals there, surprising openness to the challenges that have faced economics. And I think partly, 10 years after the crisis, we are in a different place than we were 10 years ago. There's more openness there. There's more initiatives there. The Institute for New Economic Thinking, the Rebuilding Macroeconomics Framework in the UK, and working with those people and being open having working relationships with economists is really important. It isn't always going to be successful, and it does depend on reciprocity. It does depend on a degree of interest from the other side. But to me, there's more and more really well-established economists who are beginning to want to be reciprocal.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? We are, well, thank you. I know it's the evening there, and you probably want to go on.
I just had a question for you, Peter, in a way, which was this question about the sort of depth and resonance aspect. As you see it, and I know that E4A has had this philosophical and ethical content. Is that something that you see as being increased in E4E, as framed differently, or have you not got so far as thinking in those terms yet?
Partly, I've not gotten that far to thinking. I want to keep the Big Bang to the Ecozoic, or Big Bang to the Anthropocene there, because I think the central message of, or a central message of ecological economics is an ontological message.
Yeah.
That we have to understand our place in the universe very differently than we do. So I see that there. One of the things we built into the new project is to create some capacity for the three research areas we have, which are ethics and ontology, economics and finance, and law and governance. So we would basically have the capacity within the project to be much more aggressive or interactive with those research efforts with other people. We're basically taking economics as a sort of poster child, conventional neoclassical economics as the poster child of a really ungrounded thought system. But these other ones have lots of similar problems. So I would see we can do a much better job on this broader agenda within the new project if we're able to get the funding to do it. So yes, very much so. I want to keep it going. I want to strengthen it and build it. And we probably should have a session with you and some others down the road in a few months about what to do and whether we've got it well grounded. I mean, this has been a bit of a dash in the last few years, and we certainly are ways that this could be done better. So
yeah, no,
and we are in touch with the grants that you mentioned a bit ago. So
yeah, good.
That's good. Well, thanks so much, and have a great evening.